Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we are going deep into some property management terms.
Ooh,
Exciting.
it is. Yeah, I find this stuff really interesting. So
Yeah.
we're working with a glossary of terms from Meritorious Consultants LLC, and I gotta say, this stuff. It's not just for landlords or property managers.
Right.
Whether you're renting or thinking about investing or even just curious about real estate, understanding all this lingo that we're going to get into today can be a serious advantage.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the language of the game,
Yeah.
right? So you can be a more informed player whether you're on the buying or the selling side or renting side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's get started with some foundational terms,
Okay.
just to kind of make sure that we're all on the same page here. Take the property management agreement, for example.
Yeah.
Sounds kind of formal, but it's basically the rule book
Yeah.
for how a property manager will handle things for the owner.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. It's that kind of that roadmap.
That outlines those responsibilities
Yeah.
for both the property manager and the owner.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of covers everything, right? From collecting rent to handling those maintenance requests, even down to marketing vacant units.
Right, right. And what about tenant screening?
Ooh.
I remember going through that whole process when I was renting my first apartment.
Yeah.
I felt pretty intense.
Oh, it can be a thorough process for sure. But remember, it's not just about protecting the landlords from
Right.
maybe some problematic tenants, but a good screening process can also help to ensure that you as a tenant
Right.
are living in a safe
Okay.
and responsible community.
That's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it from that side
Yeah,
before. And of course, we can't forget the lease agreement.
the big one.
This documents the cornerstone of any rental agreement.
Absolutely.
It's legally binding. So it's really crucial to understand all the details before you sign.
Yeah, break it down piece by piece.
Right. It outlines everything.
Yeah.
From, the rent amount and the terms of payment
Hmm.
to the length of the lease and each party's responsibilities.
Right. And that's why it's so important to read through that carefully and ask any questions you have.
Yeah, definitely. Now let's get into some financial lingo.
Okay.
Meritorious Consultants, helps us break down some of these key financial terms. For example, the rent roll.
Yeah.
Might sound intimidating,
Right?
but it's really just a document that tracks the rental income coming in for the property.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a snapshot of the property's financial health.
Okay.
By analyzing that rent roll,
Yeah.
you can see which units are occupied, what rent's being charged, if there's any late payments.
Right.
That's gold, for property owners and for investors.
So you're saying like a savvy investor could use the rent roll to spot potential problems
Yeah.
or even, see opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, think about it, like a high number of vacant units
Right.
or consistent late payments. Those are some red flags. Right. But on the other hand, you see that rents are consistently below market value.
Right.
That might be an opportunity to increase those rents
Yeah.
and really boost that property's income.
Yeah, wow. I'm starting to see how understanding these terms can be really powerful in real estate.
For sure.
Okay, what about common area maintenance or CAM?
Yes.
I've seen that fee on some of my bills, but I've never really been quite sure what it covers.
Yeah. CAM fees, they cover the costs of maintaining those shared spaces in a property that benefit all the tenants.
Okay.
So think about things like keeping the lobby clean, landscaping, snow removal, even security,
Right, right.
All of that might be included in CAM.
So everyone's chipping in
Yeah.
to keep the common area
Yeah,
in good shape.
And the way those fees are calculated and how they're divided up amongst the tenants is usually outlined in that lease agreement.
Yeah,
So it's important to really understand, how those costs are determined,
right.
especially if you're renting a commercial space where those CAM charges can be significant.
Okay, good to know. Now let's talk about something everyone loves, the security deposit.
Yeah.
What is the real purpose of this, and what should renters keep in mind?
Well, the security deposit is a safety net for landlords.
Okay.
It helps cover potential damages to the property
Right.
beyond just normal wear and tear, right? It can also be used sometimes to cover unpaid rent
Okay.
or other breaches of the lease agreement.
So like if a tenant accidentally, spills red wine on the carpet or punches a hole in the wall,
Yeah.
the landlord can use that security deposit
Yeah.
to cover those repairs.
Yeah, that's the general idea. But it's important to remember that there are laws governing how those security deposits can be used and returned.
Okay.
Right. So both landlords and tenants should be familiar with those specific regulations
Mm-hmm.
in their their state or local jurisdiction.
Right, right. And I imagine there are often disputes over what constitutes normal wear and tear versus damage.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important for both parties to really document the condition of the property at the
Yeah.
beginning and end of the lease.
Right,
Take photos, do a thorough walkthrough.
right.
You can prevent misunderstandings, prevent potential disputes later on down the road.
Yeah, it's great advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about a couple of terms that can help us understand a property's financial performance.
Okay.
First up, net operating income, or NOI.
Yeah, NOI, think of it like the bottom line for a property.
Yeah.
It tells you how much money that property is actually making
Okay.
after you deduct all the operating expenses from the revenue.
We're talking about things like property taxes, insurance, all those maintenance costs, utilities, property management fees.
All of that, right. NOI gives those investors a really clear picture of the property's profitability.
Okay.
It's often used to compare different investment opportunities.
So it sounds like NOI is a key figure
Yeah,
for anyone who's thinking about buying or selling a property.
absolutely. And closely related to NOI is the concept of capital expenditures, or CapEx.
Okay.
And those are big-ticket expenses, major improvements, or repairs to the property.
Right, right.
So think about replacing a roof, upgrading that HVAC system.
Yeah.
Even a major renovation would fall under CapEx.
So if we're talking about like a leaky faucet,
Yeah,
that would be an operating expense.
right.
But a complete plumbing overhaul,
It's CapEx.
that would be CapEx.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. And why is that distinction important?
Well, it's important because CapEx can have a significant impact on a property's overall value
Okay,
and its profitability.
got it. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about a couple terms related to rights and responsibilities.
Okay.
First up, eviction.
Eviction,
A word no tenant wants to hear,
for sure.
but it's important to understand the process.
Right.
So what is it?
So eviction is the legal process of removing a tenant from a property.
Okay.
It's usually a last resort for landlords, but it can happen if a tenant, fails to pay rent, violates the terms of the lease, or damages the property.
It sounds complicated. Are there specific rules that landlords have to follow?
Absolutely. Eviction laws are very specific,
Okay.
and they vary from state to state,
Right.
but landlords have to follow the proper procedures,
Oh,
which typically involve providing written notices
Okay.
and giving that tenant a chance to remedy the situation
right.
before taking them to court.
So it's not something that can just happen overnight.
No, it's a legal process.
Right.
It requires that due diligence and careful documentation on the part of the landlord.
Okay, good. And what about the term habitable condition?
Habitable condition, yeah.
It seems like a pretty fundamental concept.
It is. It is. It means that the property meets basic living standards
Okay.
and is safe for occupancy.
Right.
So that includes things like functioning plumbing and heating,
Right.
adequate ventilation, structural integrity,
Yeah.
all of those things.
So landlords are legally obligated to provide tenants
Yes,
with a safe and livable space.
exactly. It's a fundamental right for tenants.
Okay.
And landlords are responsible for maintaining those standards throughout the lease.
Got it. Okay, now let's move on to a couple of more, complex terms
Okay.
that can give you a real edge
Yeah.
in the real estate world.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of real estate investment trusts, or REITs?
REITs, yeah. Those are a fascinating way for individuals to invest in large-scale real estate projects without actually having to buy an entire property themselves.
Okay.
So they pool money from multiple investors to purchase and manage these income-producing properties like shopping malls,
Right.
office buildings,
Okay.
even apartment complexes.
So it's a way to diversify your investment portfolio
Mm-hmm.
and potentially earn dividends from real estate
Yeah.
without having to deal with all the headaches of actually being a landlord.
Exactly. REITs offer a way to tap into that real estate market
Right.
with a relatively small investment.
Okay, cool. Now let's talk about another interesting term, the triple net lease, or the NN lease.
The triple whammy.
That's a little intimidating.
It can be. It can be. With a triple net lease, the tenant's responsible not only for paying the base rent, but also for covering their share of the property's operating expenses.
Okay.
So that includes property taxes, insurance, even those maintenance costs.
So it's almost like taking on some of the financial responsibilities
Mm-hmm.
that would typically fall on the landlord.
Exactly. Triple net leases are more common in commercial real estate,
Okay.
and they can be beneficial for both parties under certain circumstances.
I imagine there's a lot to consider
Yeah,
before entering into that kind of agreement.
absolutely. It's crucial for both landlords and tenants to fully understand
Yeah.
those financial implications and the potential risks before signing.
Right. And finally, let's touch on a term that can be a real win-win for both tenants and landlords.
Okay.
The tenant improvement allowance or TI allowance.
Oh, yes. The TI allowance, this is essentially a financial contribution from the landlord to help the tenant customize their rental space. It's most common in commercial leases, especially for like office spaces or retail storefronts.
So if a tenant needs to build out their space with like, specific features or finishes,
Right.
the landlord might contribute
Yeah.
funds to those improvements.
Exactly. TI allowances can cover things like new flooring, paint, lighting, even custom built-ins.
Right, right.
It's a way for landlords to attract and retain those tenants,
Right.
by offering them more flexibility and control over their space.
So it sounds like a great way to create a more customized
Mm-hmm.
and functional workspace.
For sure.
And it helps the landlords keep their properties competitive
Yeah,
in a tough market.
absolutely. TI allowances are a great example of how understanding these terms can help you negotiate a more favorable lease agreement.
Right. Really.
Create a space that truly meets your needs.
Yeah. Wow, we've covered so much ground already.
We have.
I'm starting to see how mastering this vocabulary can really empower you in the real estate world.
Yeah, it's all about knowledge and understanding.
And we've only just begun. We'll be back in the next part of our deep dive to explore even more nuanced terms and concepts.
Right.
That'll take your real estate knowledge to the next level.
I can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
All right, we'll be back. Welcome back. I'm already feeling more confident navigating the real estate world.
That's great to hear. We've laid a solid foundation.
Yeah.
So now we can kind of explore some of those more nuanced concepts
Right.
that really separate, the amateurs from the pros.
Perfect. I'm ready to level up.
Okay, let's talk about amortization.
Okay.
It's a term that often throws people off, but it's actually pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Think of it as the process of gradually paying off a debt, like a mortgage,
Okay.
over time through regular installments.
Okay, so each time you make a mortgage payment, a portion of it goes towards paying down the principal, which is the original loan amount,
Yes.
and another portion covers the interest charged by the lender. Exactly. And over time, the balance of your loan gradually decreases until it's fully paid off.
Okay.
Understanding how amortization works can be incredibly helpful when you're comparing different mortgage options.
I've always wondered about that. How does choosing a 15-year mortgage versus a 30-year mortgage affect the total amount of interest you end up paying?
That's a great question, and that's where amortization gets really interesting. With a shorter-term mortgage, like a 15-year loan, your monthly payments will be higher,
Okay.
but you'll pay significantly less interest over the life of the loan.
Right.
On the other hand, a longer-term mortgage, like a 30-year loan, you'll have those lower monthly payments,
Okay.
but you'll end up paying a lot more interest in the long run.
Wow. That makes a huge difference. It's definitely something to consider when weighing your financing options.
Absolutely. Now, while we're on the topic of mortgages,
Yeah.
let's talk about the debt service coverage ratio, or DSCR.
Okay.
This is a key metric that lenders use to assess a borrower's ability to repay a loan.
So it's a way for lenders to gauge the risk involved
Yes.
in lending money for a real estate project.
Precisely. The DSCR compares the property's net operating income, which we discussed earlier,
Right.
to its annual debt obligations,
Okay.
like mortgage payments.
So a higher DSCR indicates a stronger financial position.
Yes.
And the lower risk for the lender.
Exactly. So if a property is generating enough income to comfortably cover its debt payments,
Right.
it's more likely to get approved for a loan.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lenders want to see that the property's income
Mm.
can consistently cover those debt payments.
Exactly.
Even if there are unexpected expenses.
Yeah, or fluctuations in rental income.
Right.
Oh.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about a concept that's crucial for both tenants and landlords.
Okay.
Quiet enjoyment.
Oh, yes.
It sounds lovely.
It is a pretty great concept. Quiet enjoyment refers to the tenant's right to undisturbed use and possession of their rental property.
Okay.
It means they have the right to live in peace and quiet, without unreasonable interference from the landlord or other tenants.
So no surprise, late night parties are construction projects.
Right.
Happening next door at 3 a.m.
Exactly. It's about respecting that tenant's privacy and right to a peaceful living environment.
Okay.
Reasonable noise during daytime hours is usually permitted,
Right.
But anything excessive or disruptive can be a violation of that tenant's right to quiet enjoyment.
Okay. And on the flip side, what about the landlord's right of entry? I know landlords can't just barge in whenever they please.
That's right. Landlords typically need to provide reasonable notice before entering a tenant's unit except in emergency situations.
Right.
And they must have a valid reason for entry,
Okay.
such as for repairs, routine inspections, or to show the property to prospective tenants or buyers.
So it's all about striking a balance
Yes.
between the landlord's responsibilities
Yeah,
and the tenant's right to privacy.
absolutely. Now let's dive into another financial term
Okay.
that's particularly relevant for commercial real estate: common area maintenance, or CAM. We touched on this briefly earlier, but it's worth exploring in a little more detail.
Yeah, I'm ready to unravel this CAM mystery once and for all.
Great. So as we mentioned before, CAM refers to the expenses associated with maintaining those shared spaces in a property that benefit all the tenants:
Right.
lobbies, hallways, elevators, parking areas,
Okay.
even landscaping.
So the cost of keeping those common areas clean, safe, and functional
Yeah,
is shared among the tenants.
exactly. And the way those costs are divided is usually based on the tenant's proportionate share of the total leasable area.
Okay.
So a tenant occupying a larger space would typically contribute more to CAM expenses
Right.
than a tenant with a smaller space.
That seems fair.
Yeah,
But I imagine CAM charges can be quite substantial.
they certainly can. That's why it's so crucial for tenants, especially those considering those commercial leases,
Right.
to carefully review those CAM provisions in their lease agreements.
Okay.
Understanding how those charges are calculated and what specific expenses are included can help avoid surprises down the road.
So pay close attention to those CAM details.
Yes.
Okay. Now let's talk about usable square footage.
Usable square footage.
I know it's not the same as like the total square footage of a space,
Right.
but I'm not entirely sure how it's calculated.
Yeah, you're right. It can be a bit tricky. Usable square footage refers to the portion of a space that can actually be used for its intended purpose.
Okay.
So it excludes areas like hallways, restrooms, stairwells, elevator shafts, mechanical rooms
Okay.
that are necessary for the building's operation but not directly occupied by the tenant.
So if you're renting an office space, the usable square footage will be the area where you actually set up your desks, your workstations, your meeting rooms,
Exactly.
but not those shared spaces.
Precisely. And this distinction is crucial when you're comparing lease options and calculating that rent per square foot.
Right.
You want to make sure you're paying for the space you're actually using,
Right.
not for those common areas that are factored into those CAM charges.
Right. Right. That makes perfect sense. Now, what about preventative maintenance?
Preventative maintenance, yes.
It sounds like a very proactive approach
It is.
to property management.
Yes, preventative maintenance is all about staying ahead of those potential problems by being proactive
Right.
and taking care of your property. Think of it as that ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
So instead of waiting for things to break down,
Yeah.
you're scheduling regular inspections,
Right.
cleaning minor repairs just to keep everything running smoothly.
Exactly. This approach can save landlords a lot of time, money, and stress in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. Can you give me some examples of preventative maintenance tasks?
Sure. Regularly servicing your HVAC system, inspecting and cleaning gutters, checking for leaks, testing smoke detectors,
Right.
those are all great examples of preventative maintenance.
Yeah.
These simple tasks can prevent those small issues from becoming big problems that require costly repairs.
This sounds like a smart strategy for preserving the value of the property
For sure.
and keeping tenants happy.
Absolutely. Now, what about leasehold improvements? I've heard that term thrown around. I'm not sure what it really means.
Leasehold improvements are alterations or upgrades made to a rental property by the tenant. Okay.
Usually to customize the space to meet their specific needs.
Okay.
So this could include anything from new flooring, paint, lighting,
Yeah.
to custom built-ins, specialized equipment, even structural modifications.
So if a retail tenant wants to build out their storefront
Yeah.
with, custom displays, or a restaurant wants to install a commercial kitchen,
Yes.
those would be considered leasehold improvement.
That's right. And it's important to note that these improvements typically become part of the property
Okay.
once that lease expires,
Okay.
unless otherwise agreed upon in the lease agreement.
Right.
So tenants should carefully consider those long-term implications.
Right. Right. That's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's talk about a term that's often debated in the housing world:
Okay.
rent control.
Rent control.
I know it's intended to protect tenants from excessive rent hikes,
Yeah.
but I've also heard that it can have unintended consequences.
Rent control is a complex issue with valid arguments on both sides.
Okay.
As you mentioned, it's designed to promote affordability and protect those tenants from being priced out of their homes.
Right.
It typically involves government-imposed limits on how much landlords can increase rent,
Okay.
often tying those increases to inflation
Hmm.
or other economic indicators.
So it can provide stability for tenants,
Yeah,
especially in areas with high housing demand.
that's the intention. However, critics of rent control argue that it can discourage new construction,
Right.
reduce the quality of existing rental units,
Yeah.
and even create a black market for apartments.
Wow. It sounds like a tricky balance to strike.
It is. The debate over rent control often boils down to the question of whether the benefits outweigh the potential drawbacks.
Definitely a topic that deserves careful consideration and further exploration.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now let's shift back to some financial concepts. Okay.
Have you ever heard of the capitalization rate or cap rate?
I have, but I'm not sure I fully grasp what it means.
Okay, so the cap rate is a key metric for evaluating the potential return on investment for a property.
Okay.
It's calculated by dividing the property's net operating income by its market value.
So a higher cap rate generally means a better investment.
It can indicate a higher potential return on investment,
Okay.
but it's important to remember that it also typically comes with higher risk.
Okay.
A lower cap rate might suggest lower risk, but also a potentially lower return.
So it's always a balancing act.
Exactly.
Risk versus reward.
Risk versus reward. Now, let's talk about a trend that's becoming increasingly popular, especially in those luxury properties.
Okay.
Concierge services.
Concierge services in apartment buildings. That's interesting.
Yeah.
What kinds of services are we talking about?
Concierge services in residential properties are all about providing those personalized services
Okay.
that go above and beyond the basics.
This could include package handling, dry cleaning, pickup and delivery, travel arrangements, grocery shopping, pet care,
Wow,
even securing tickets to events.
that sounds pretty luxurious.
It definitely adds a level of convenience and exclusivity to apartment living.
Right.
And for busy professionals or anyone who values their time, concierge services can be a major selling point.
And I imagine these services come at a price.
You're right. Often properties that offer concierge services
Yeah.
charge an amenity fee in addition to the rent to cover the cost of providing those perks.
So it's like paying for an extra layer of service
Mhm.
and convenience.
Makes sense.
Now, what about mixed-use developments?
Mixed-use developments.
I've noticed more and more of these popping up in cities across the country.
Yeah, mixed-use developments are projects that combine different types of uses
Okay.
within a single building or complex.
Okay.
So instead of having a building dedicated solely to residential units,
Right.
you might have a mix of apartments, retail stores, restaurants, office space, even entertainment venues all in one location.
So it's like a great way to create these vibrant, walkable communities
Yeah.
where people can live, workshop, and play
Yeah,
all in one place.
exactly. Mixed-use developments are becoming increasingly popular
Yeah.
as they offer a more integrated and convenient lifestyle.
And I bet they're attractive to developers because they can generate revenue
Yes.
from multiple sources.
Absolutely. By diversifying those income streams,
Right.
mixed-use developments can potentially reduce risk and increase profitability.
Okay, now let's talk about title insurance.
Title
And
insurance.
I know this is something you get when you buy a property,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure what it actually covers.
So title insurance is a crucial safeguard for both lenders and property owners.
Yeah.
It protects them from financial losses arising from defects or encumbrances on a property's title that weren't discovered during that title search process.
Can you give me some examples of what those defects or encumbrances might be?
Sure. Unpaid leave-ins, boundary disputes, unknown heirs claiming ownership, errors in public records, even fraud or forgery in previous transactions.
Wow.
All potential issues that title insurance can protect against.
So it's essentially peace of mind,
Mm-hmm.
ensuring that the buyer has clear ownership of the property.
Exactly. Title insurance provides that financial protection and legal recourse if any unexpected title issues arise
Right.
after that purchase.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, now what about ground leases?
Ground leases.
I've heard this term used, but I'm not sure how it differs from a traditional lease.
So in a ground lease, the tenant leases only the land from the owner,
Okay.
but is responsible for constructing and maintaining the buildings on that land.
Okay.
It's essentially a long-term lease of the land itself
Yeah.
rather than the structures on it.
So the tenant would own the buildings,
Mm-hmm.
but they'd be leasing the land
That's
from
right.
the
The
landowner.
land ground leases are often used for large-scale development projects where the tenant needs that long-term commitment to the land but doesn't want to purchase it outright.
Right.
They can also be beneficial for landowners who want to retain ownership of the land
Okay.
while generating that steady stream of income.
It sounds like a unique arrangement with its own set of complexities.
It definitely is. Ground leases can be very complex with terms that can last for decades.
Wow.
It's crucial for both parties to carefully consider those long-term implications before entering into this type of agreement.
Now let's talk about assessed value.
Assessed value.
I know this is related to property taxes, but I'm not sure how it's determined.
The assessed value is the value assigned to a property by the local government for tax purposes.
Okay.
It's typically based on factors like the property's market value, location, condition, and any recent improvements.
So a property with a higher assessed value will generally have higher property taxes.
That's right. The assessed value is multiplied by the local tax rate,
Okay.
also known as the mill rate.
Okay. To determine the amount of property taxes owed.
And it seems like the assessed value can fluctuate over time depending on market conditions and property improvements.
Absolutely. Assessed values are typically reassessed periodically,
Yeah.
often annually or every few years,
Right.
to reflect changes in the real estate market and the property itself.
Now let's talk about risk management in the context of property management.
Risk management.
Sounds like a pretty important aspect of owning and managing real estate.
Risk management is all about identifying, assessing, and mitigating potential risks
Right.
associated with real estate.
What are some common risks that landlords and property managers need to consider?
Oh, there's a wide range.
Yeah.
Property damage, liability claims, tenant disputes, natural disasters,
Right.
economic downturns,
Right.
even changes in laws and regulations.
So it's about being prepared for the unexpected.
Exactly. Effective risk management involves implementing strategies to minimize those risks.
This can include things like obtaining adequate insurance coverage,
Right.
conducting regular inspections,
Right.
having clear lease agreements and policies in place,
Right.
and just staying informed about industry trends and best practices.
It sounds like a lot to juggle,
It is.
but it's essential
But it is.
for protecting your investment and ensuring smooth operation of your property.
Absolutely. Risk management is an ongoing process, but it's a crucial part of successful property ownership and management.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this segment. My head is spinning with all these new terms and concepts,
Yeah,
but I'm definitely feeling more confident about my real estate knowledge.
that's great to hear. We're making great progress.
Yeah.
And there's still more to discover. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore even more specialized terms and concepts that'll round out your real estate expertise.
We're back for the final stretch of our property management term deep dive. It's amazing how much ground we've covered already. I feel like I've unlocked a whole new level of understanding about the real estate world.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? And we're not done yet. We've still got some fascinating terms and concepts to explore.
I'm ready for more.
Yeah.
What's first on the agenda?
Let's talk about earnest money. You know that good faith deposit that a buyer puts down when they're serious about purchasing a property?
Ah, yes. It's like showing the seller you're not just window shopping.
Exactly. Earnest money is typically held in an escrow account until the closing.
Right.
If the sale goes through as planned, the earnest money is applied towards that down payment.
Okay.
But if the buyer backs out for a reason that's not allowed in the contract, they might forfeit that money.
So it's a way to protect the seller in case the buyer gets cold feet.
Precisely. It provides some financial assurance that the buyer is serious about following through with the purchase.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about a letter of intent, or LOI? I've heard this term used in business deals, but I'm not sure how it applies to real estate.
An LOI in real estate is very similar to an LOI in other business contexts.
Okay.
It's a non-binding agreement outlining the key terms of a proposed transaction, such as a lease or a purchase agreement.
So it's like a preliminary roadmap before you get into all the nitty-gritty details of a formal contract.
Exactly. The LOI helps both parties get on the same page and clarify those key points, like the purchase price, lease terms, contingencies, and any other important conditions of the deal.
Sounds like a good way to avoid misunderstandings.
Yeah.
And ensure that everyone's on the same wavelength before things get too far along.
Absolutely. Now here's a term that sounds a bit dramatic.
Okay.
Force majeure. Have you ever come across this one?
I have, but I'm not entirely sure what it means. It sounds like something out of a legal thriller.
It does have a certain dramatic flair to it,
Mm.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
Force majeure is a legal clause that essentially excuses a party from fulfilling their contractual obligations due to unforeseen events beyond their control.
So we're talking about things like natural disasters,
Yeah.
pandemics, wars, or other major disruptions that make it impossible to fulfill the terms of a contract.
Exactly. These are circumstances that no one could reasonably anticipate or prevent.
Right.
For example, if a hurricane severely damages a property, making it uninhabitable, a force majeure clause in a lease agreement might excuse the tenant from paying rent during that period of displacement.
Yeah, that seems like an important clause to have in a contract,
Yeah,
especially in areas that are prone to natural disasters or other unforeseen events.
absolutely. It's all about providing some flexibility and protection for both parties
Yeah.
in the event of those extraordinary circumstances.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about pro forma?
Okay.
That sounds like a fancy financial term.
Pro forma is essentially a financial projection.
Okay.
It's a statement that forecasts future income and expenses for a property.
So it's like a crystal ball for real estate investors,
Yes.
helping them predict a property's potential profitability.
Yeah, exactly. The pro forma takes into account factors like projected rent growth,
Okay.
vacancy rates, operating expenses, and potential capital expenditures to estimate the property's net operating income and cash flow
Right.
over a specific period of time.
It sounds like an essential tool for evaluating investment opportunities
Yeah.
and making informed decisions
Mhm.
about buying, selling, or developing real estate.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about highest and best use.
Okay.
This is a key concept in real estate appraisal and development.
I've heard the term before,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure I fully grasp what it means.
Highest and best use refers to the most profitable and legally permissible use of a property
Okay.
that would contribute the most to its value.
So it's about maximizing the potential
Yeah.
of a piece of land or a building.
Precisely. For example, if a property is currently zoned for residential use, but could be rezoned for commercial use,
Like-
and that commercial use would generate significantly higher returns,
Yep.
then the highest and best use would likely be commercial development.
It seems like a crucial consideration for developers and investors
sure.
who are looking to really maximize their returns.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of development, let's talk about environmental impact statements, or EIS.
Oh.
These are often required for larger development projects.
I'm guessing this has to do with assessing the environmental impact of a project.
You got it. An EIS is a detailed report that analyzes the potential environmental consequences of a proposed development project.
So it's a way to ensure that development is done responsibly and with minimal impact on the surrounding environment.
Exactly. The EIS typically covers a wide range of environmental factors,
Okay.
including air and water quality,
Mhm.
noise pollution,
Right,
traffic congestion,
right.
wildlife habitats,
Okay.
and potential impacts on endangered species.
Sounds like a thorough and important process.
Yeah.
Especially as we become more aware of the environmental impact of development.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears and talk about a fundamental legal document in real estate.
Oh, the deed. Yes. The deed is essentially the document that proves ownership of a property, right?
That's right. The deed is a legal document that officially transfers ownership of a property from one party to another.
Okay.
It outlines the details of the transfer, including the names of the grantor, seller, and grantee, buyer,
Okay.
the legal description of the property, and any covenants or restrictions associated with the property.
So it's the document that establishes that chain of title
Mm.
and proves who owns what.
Exactly. The deed is a crucial piece of the puzzle in real estate transactions.
Now, what about encumbrances?
Encumbrances.
I've heard this term used in relation to property titles, but I'm not sure what it means.
An encumbrance is any claim or restriction on a property's title
Okay.
that might limit its use or transferability.
Okay.
It's basically something that affects or burdens the title.
Can you give me some examples of encumbrances?
Sure. Mortgages, lines, easements, restrictions imposed by homeowner associations.
Right.
Even leases can be considered encumbrances.
So before buying a property, it's important to make sure there are no unexpected encumbrances on the title.
Absolutely. That's why a title search is typically conducted as part of the real estate transaction process.
Oh,
It's
well.
a way to uncover any potential encumbrances
Right.
and address them before that sale is finalized.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about the mill rate.
Mill rate.
I know this has to do with property taxes,
Yeah.
but I'm always a bit confused about how it's calculated.
The mill rate is simply the the tax rate used to calculate property taxes.
Okay.
It's expressed in mils, which represent 1/1000th of a dollar.
Okay.
So a mill rate of 10 mils would equate to a tax of $10 for every $1,000 of assessed property value.
So the mill rate multiplied by the assessed value of a property determines the amount of property taxes owed.
Exactly. And mill rates can vary significantly from one location to another, depending on local government budgets and the need for public services.
It's one of those things that have a big impact on the cost of owning a property.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about tenant mix,
Right.
a concept that's particularly relevant in commercial real estate.
I'm guessing this has to do with the composition of tenants in a commercial property.
You're right. Tenant mix refers to the combination of businesses that occupy a shopping center, office building, or other commercial property.
Okay.
A well-planned tenant mix can create synergy, attract customers,
Right.
and enhance the overall success of the property.
So it's about creating a diverse and complementary mix of businesses that appeal to a target market.
Exactly. For example, a shopping center might strive for a tenant mix that includes a mix of anchor stores, specialty shops, restaurants, and entertainment venues
Right.
to create a dynamic and appealing destination for those shoppers.
It sounds like a strategic way to maximize foot traffic
For sure.
and create a vibrant commercial environment.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about management fees,
Okay.
a topic that's relevant to anyone considering hiring a property manager.
I know property managers charge fees for their services, but I'm not sure how those fees are typically structured.
Management fees can vary depending on the scope of services provided,
Right.
the type of property being managed, and the local market.
Oh.
But typically they're calculated as a percentage of the property's gross rental income.
So if a property generates $10,000 per month in rent
Yeah.
and the management fee is 10%,
Mm-hmm.
the property manager would receive $1,000 per month.
That's right. It's important to have a clear agreement with your property manager outlining the specific services included in that management fee
Okay.
and any additional charges for extra services.
Okay, good to know. Now let's talk about depreciation.
Depreciation.
I know this is a tax-related concept, but I'm not sure how it applies to real estate.
Depreciation is a valuable tax deduction that allows real estate investors to recover the cost of their investment over time.
Yeah.
It recognizes that properties wear out and lose value as they age.
So even though a property might appreciate in value over time, you can still deduct a portion of its cost each year for tax purposes.
Exactly. The IRS allows you to depreciate residential rental properties over 27.5 years
Okay.
and commercial properties over 39 years.
Okay.
This can significantly reduce your taxable income and increase your after-tax cash flow.
That's a pretty sweet deal for real estate investors.
It is. And finally, let's talk about closing,
Okay.
the grand finale of any real estate transaction.
Yeah, I'm picturing lots of paperwork and handshakes.
That's pretty accurate. Closing is the final stage of a real estate transaction where ownership of the property is officially transferred
Right.
from the seller to the buyer.
Okay.
It's when all the necessary documents are signed,
Mm-hmm.
funds are exchanged,
Yeah.
and the deed is recorded,
Okay.
marking that official change in ownership.
Sounds like a big moment for both a buyer and seller.
It definitely is. Closing represents the culmination of all the hard work,
Yep.
the negotiation, the due diligence that goes into a real estate transaction.
Right.
It's the moment when dreams are realized and investments are secured.
Wow, what an incredible journey this has been. We've explored so many fascinating terms and concepts, and I feel like I've gained a whole new level of understanding about the real estate world.
I'm glad to hear that. Knowledge is power, especially in real estate.
Yeah.
And by mastering this vocabulary, you're well on your way to navigating the complexities of property ownership, management, and investment with confidence.
Absolutely. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive.
You got it.
I feel empowered to tackle any real estate challenge that comes my way.
And remember, the learning never stops.
Yeah.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions,
Yeah.
and keep those real estate dreams alive.
That's great advice. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, happy investing.